One waltz was all it took to ruin a life. In the glittering ballrooms of London society, a dance usually meant nothing more than a polite moment shared between strangers. Names were written on dance cards, music played, and young ladies hoped to catch the eye of a wealthy gentleman. But inside Sterling House, the rules were different. Clara Holloway did not know that. She did not know about the strange law written into the Sterling family history almost 200 years earlier. But she did not know that the music played at midnight inside that house was not meant for entertainment. It was a binding ritual, and by the time she realized the truth, it was already too late. The fog of London wrapped itself around the streets of Grosvenor Square like a damp blanket on the night of November 14th, 1891. Carriages lined the road outside Sterling House, while servants hurried through the front gates carrying trays of champagne and lanterns. Inside, the ballroom glittered with golden light. Hundreds of candles burned in tall crystal chandeliers. Women in silk gowns and jeweled masks moved across the floor like bright birds. Gentlemen in dark suits laughed loudly, their voices echoing off the marble walls. It was the grand masquerade of the season, and Clara Holloway did not belong there. She stood near a tall pillar at the edge of the room, trying to make herself small. Her dress was simple blue silk, carefully mended at the hem where the thread had worn thin. Her mask was plain white satin. Compared to the rich women around her, she looked like a shadow. Lady Augusta, her aunt, leaned close and pinched her arm sharply. "Stand up straight, Clara," she whispered through clenched teeth. "And for heaven's sake, do not wander around. Stay by the pillar, and do not let anyone see that hem." Clara nodded quietly. She had heard those words her whole life. She was the poor cousin, but the extra guest brought along to fill empty space, while her beautiful cousin Lydia searched for a wealthy husband. Clara did not complain. She had learned long ago that quiet observation was better than attention. From her place near the pillar, she watched the dancers spin beneath the chandeliers, and above them all, standing on the balcony that overlooked the ballroom, was the master of the house, Lord Silas Sterling, the Earl of Ashborne. Even from a distance he was impossible to ignore. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black with a velvet mask covering his face, he leaned against the balcony railing like a silent judge watching his court. People whispered about him constantly. Some said he had killed a man in a duel in Vienna. Others said the Sterling fortune was cursed. Everyone agreed on one thing: Lord Silas Sterling never danced. The night continued with laughter and music. Champagne glasses clinked together, while the orchestra played waltzes that carried across the room like gentle waves. Clara remained near her pillar until a sudden rush of movement startled her. Her cousin Lydia burst into the small alcove beside her. Lydia's face was pale beneath her painted cheeks. She clutched her stomach and leaned heavily against the wall. "I cannot do it," Lydia gasped. Clara grabbed her arm in concern. "What happened?" "The heat," Lydia whispered. I feel faint, but I promised Lord Egerton the midnight waltz." Clara blinked in surprise. "The midnight waltz?" "Yes," Lydia said desperately. "He is waiting by the orchestra pit. If I do not appear, he will think I chose another man over him. My chances will be ruined." "Then I will explain to him," Clara said quickly. But Lydia grabbed her hands tightly. "No, you must take my place." Clara froze. "What?" "You are my height," Lydia said quickly. "And you are already wearing blue. Put on my cloak and keep your head down. Dance one turn and leave." "That is ridiculous," Clara whispered. "For the family," Lydia begged. "Please." Clara hesitated. The plan was foolish, but she knew her aunt's temper. If Lydia lost a chance at marriage, Clara Ara would hear about it for years. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, one turn." Lydia quickly placed her dark velvet domino cloak over Clara Ara's shoulders and pulled the hood low over her mask. So, the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. 11:59. The orchestra lifted their instruments. A deep, heavy note filled the ballroom. It did not sound like a cheerful waltz. It sounded like a warning. Clara Ara hurried through the crowd toward the orchestra pit. She searched for a man wearing the blue mask Lydia had described. Instead, she saw a tall figure dressed entirely in black. Before she could turn away, the crowd shifted and pushed her forward. She stumbled, and a strong hand caught her waist. "You are late," a deep voice said. Clara Ara kept her head down. "I apologize." The crowd. "The choice is made then?" the man asked. The question confused her, but she only wanted the moment to end. "Yes," she said softly. The man did not bow. He simply pulled her onto the center of the floor, and suddenly the entire room went silent. Not gradually. Instantly. The other dancers stepped away as if the space around Clara Ara had become dangerous. She looked around in confusion. The orchestra continued playing, but no one else moved. She and the man in black were the only dancers on the floor. His hand tightened on her back as he guided her through the waltz. His movements were powerful and controlled, spinning her faster than proper society manners allowed. Clara Ara's heart began to pound. "Why has everyone stopped?" she whispered. The man leaned closer. "Because," he said quietly, "no one dances the midnight waltz at Sterling House unless they are ready to pay the price." Clara Ara's breath caught. "Who are you?" The music crashed to its final note, and the man reached up and removed his mask. Gasps filled the ballroom. Lord Silas Sterling looked down at her with cold gray eyes. "I am your husband," he announced clearly. The words echoed across the silent room. "By the covenant of 1704, the woman who takes the last dance in this house accepts the master's hand." Clara Ara felt her knees weaken. "The contract is sealed." The ballroom began to spin around her, and the last thing she saw before darkness closed in was Lydia standing among the crowd. And Lydia was smiling. Clara Ara woke to the sound of voices. Her head throbbed and the world felt heavy, as if she had fallen into someone else's life and could not climb out again. When her eyes opened, she found herself sitting in a high-backed chair inside a large, dark room. Bookshelves covered the walls from floor to ceiling. The smell of leather and dust filled the air. But it was the library of Sterling House. Across the room, Lady Augusta paced back and forth like an excited bird. "An earl," she whispered to herself again and again. "My niece has trapped an earl." Clara Ara slowly stood up. "I did not trap anyone," she said weakly. Lady Augusta stopped pacing and looked at her sharply. "Oh, do not pretend innocence now. You played your part very well." "I thought I was dancing with Lord Egerton," Clara Ara insisted. Her aunt waved a dismissive hand. Lydia is young. She makes mistakes. But this mistake has brought our family great fortune." The heavy doors of the library suddenly opened. Silas Sterling walked inside. He had removed his mask, and without it, his face seemed even sharper and more severe. Dark hair brushed his collar, and his gray eyes held a tired anger that made the room feel colder. Two men followed him carrying a long scroll. They looked more like undertakers than lawyers. Silas walked to the desk without looking at Clara Ara and poured himself a glass of brandy. He drank it in one swallow. "Mr. Blackwood," he said calmly, "explain the situation." One of the men stepped forward and adjusted his spectacles. "Miss Holloway," he began, "the Sterling family operates under a legal rule known as the Covenant of 1704. Clara Ara folded her arms. I have heard enough about that cursed covenant tonight. It was created, the lawyer continued, to prevent fortune hunters from forcing marriage upon the Earl of Ashborne. Clara Ara frowned. That makes no sense. I did not force anything. The covenant forbids the Earl from proposing marriage, the lawyer said. He may only accept it. Clara Ara stared at him. Accept what? The offer of a brave soul. He pointed toward the ballroom. The midnight waltz is that offer. When a woman steps onto the floor during the Ashborne Requiem, and she publicly declares her wish to marry the Earl. Clara Ara felt the floor drop beneath her feet. But I did not know. There were 200 witnesses, the lawyer replied gently. Clara Ara turned toward Silas. Surely you cannot expect to marry a stranger because of a misunderstanding. Silas finally looked at her. His expression held no joy, only exhaustion. The expectation is irrelevant, he said quietly. If I refuse to marry the woman who danced the waltz within 3 days, I lose everything. Everything? My title, my let, my fortune. The crown claims the estate. He stepped closer until they stood only a foot apart. I have avoided that dance for 10 years, he said softly. Tonight I stood on the balcony to make sure no one approached me. Clara Ara clenched her fists. I was tricked. My cousin begged me to take her place. Silas glanced toward Lady Augusta, who was smiling proudly beside the lawyers. Then he looked back at Clara Ara, but he noticed the worn hem of her dress, the small calluses on her fingers from needlework, the fear she was trying hard to hide. His voice lowered. It appears we are both victims of a trap. Clara Ara swallowed. Then refuse the marriage. Silas shook his head. If I refuse, I become a beggar. If you refuse, your family will be sued for breach of contract. Clara Ara felt the blood drain from her face. Lady Augusta placed a firm hand on her shoulder. She accepts, her aunt announced brightly. Of course she accepts. Silas did not look away from Clara Ara. Do you? Clara Ara felt trapped between two terrible choices. Finally, she whispered, What happens now? Silas turned toward the lawyers. Draw up the papers. He looked back at her. We marry at dawn. The ceremony took place in the small chapel behind Sterling House. No guests attended. The priest looked terrified as he rushed through the vows. When Silas placed the ring on Clara Ara's finger, the metal felt heavy and cold. It was dark iron, set with a single blood-red ruby. By noon, they were already leaving London. The carriage rattled across the countryside roads for hours. Silas spent most of the journey reading documents, ignoring her completely. Clara Ara watched him quietly. He was undeniably handsome in a harsh way, but there was tension in him, like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. You are staring, he said suddenly. I am wondering what kind of life I have been forced into, Clara Ara replied honestly. Silas closed his papers. Life in this family is rarely comfortable. The carriage slowed as they passed through massive iron gates. Ahead of them stood Ashborne Hall. The house looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Gray stone towers rose against the cloudy sky. Ivy climbed the walls like dark veins. Far below the cliffs, the sea crashed violently against the rocks. Welcome home, Silas said dryly. Inside the hall, servants stood in 2 silent rows. An older woman with a tight bun stepped forward. Lord Sterling. Mrs. Grolton, Silas said. Prepare the east wing. Her eyes shifted toward Clara Ara. The rose suite? Silas's voice hardened. Yes. Mrs. Grolton bowed stiffly and turned to Clara Ara. This way, my lady. Clara Ara followed her up the grand staircase. The portraits along the walls seemed to watch her as she passed. Every painting showed a man who looked like Silas. Dark eyes, stern faces, unhappy expressions. "Mrs. Grolton," Clara Ara asked quietly, "why did Lord Sterling seem surprised that I danced with him?" The housekeeper stopped walking. Her voice lowered. The Sterling men do not marry often. And when they do?" The woman looked at her grimly. "They do not stay married long." Clara Ara felt a chill run down her spine. The First Lady Sterling fell from the tower. The second drowned in the lake. And the Earl's mother vanished one night without explanation. Clara Ara stopped walking. "You expect me to live here after telling me that?" Mrs. Grolton leaned closer. You would be wise to lock your door at night." "Why?" The woman whispered 2 words. "The West Wing." That night, Clara Ara sat alone in the Rose Suite. The room was beautiful but dusty, as if no one had lived there for years. She heard footsteps outside the door, heavy ones. Silas, back and forth, back and forth. The handle suddenly turned. Clara Ara held her breath, but instead of opening the door, the lock clicked. From the outside, Clara Ara rushed forward. "Lord Sterling," his voice came through the wood. "Go to sleep." "Why did you lock the door?" Silence. Then he answered quietly, "For your safety." "Safety from what?" His reply chilled her blood. "From me." His footsteps faded down the hall. Clara Ara sank slowly to the floor. She looked at the iron ring on her finger glowing faintly in the moonlight. She was trapped in a stone fortress with a man who feared himself, and she intended to discover why. But morning came to Ashborne Hall with a weak gray light that slipped through the heavy curtains of the Rose Suite. Clara Ara woke suddenly as the memory of the lock echoed again in her mind. She rushed to the door and tried the handle. Still locked. "Lord Sterling!" she called. No answer. Clara Ara stood there for a moment, breathing slowly. She had grown up poor, and poverty had taught her one very important lesson. Panic solved nothing. She turned away from the door and looked around the room carefully. Her eyes stopped at the fireplace. Among the cold ashes lay a bent black hairpin. She must have dropped it the night before. Clara Ara picked it up and studied the lock on the door. Her father had once been an apothecary and a tinkerer who repaired clocks when business was slow. As a child, she had watched him open broken locks and gears with small tools. A lock was only a puzzle. She slid the hairpin inside. The metal scraped softly as she searched for the tumblers. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, a small click echoed through the room. The door swung open. Clara Ara stepped into the silent hallway. The house felt empty except for the distant roar of waves hitting the cliffs below. She could have gone downstairs and tried to escape, but something inside her told her that leaving would not solve anything. Silas had locked her away to protect her from himself. She needed to understand why. So instead of going toward the main stairs, Clara Ara turned toward the dark corridor leading to the West Wing. The air there felt colder. Dust covered the floorboards, and the windows were streaked with grime. Rooms stood abandoned behind closed doors. At the end of the corridor stood a large double door, the master's study. One side was slightly open. Clara Ara pushed it wider and stepped inside. The room was a disaster. Books were scattered across the floor. Maps covered the walls. Red ink notes had been written everywhere like frantic warnings. The smell of brandy hung in the air. And something else. Something sweet, like bitter almonds. Clara Ara walked to the desk. Several ledgers lay open. Her eyes moved across the numbers. The estate was drowning in debt. But the money was not being spent on parties or horses, Large payments had been sent to one place again and again. Grimswater Sanatorium. Clara Ara frowned. She opened the top drawer. Inside were dozens of small blue glass bottles. No labels. She lifted one carefully and uncorked it. The scent of almonds grew stronger. Her stomach tightened. She knew that smell. Rummaging through a man's grave before he is even dead is rather rude. Clara Ara spun around. Silas stood in the doorway. He looked terrible. His shirt hung open at the collar, and his hair was messy. His eyes moved wildly around the room as if searching for things that were not there. "Silas," she said slowly, "I see you escaped your room." "You should not be here," he muttered. "What is in these bottles?" Silas laughed hollowly. "Salvation, or damnation, depends on the day." He stepped further inside. "My father drank it. My grandfather drank it. Yet it keeps the madness away." "What madness?" Silas slammed his hand against the wall. "The Sterling curse!" His voice echoed through the room. "We all lose our minds eventually. We hear voices. We see enemies everywhere. By 30, we are completely mad." He leaned against the wall and covered his face. "I am 29. Clara Ara stared at the broken bottle she had dropped earlier. The blue liquid had soaked into the carpet. She knelt beside him. "Silas," she said quietly, and he lifted his head. "You are not going mad." His brow tightened. "You do not understand." "Yes, I do," Clara Ara said firmly. "My father worked with medicines. I know the smell of poison." She pointed to the floor. "That liquid contains arsenic and laudanum." Silas blinked slowly. "That is impossible. Who gives you these bottles?" "Mrs. Grolton," he muttered. "On the orders of my cousin Archibald." Clara Ara felt the pieces fall into place. The curse was not real. Someone had been poisoning him for years. Silas suddenly grabbed his stomach and groaned. "My head! My legs!" The poison was leaving his body. Clara Ara stood quickly. "We are barricading this room." She pushed a heavy sofa against the door. "From now on, you eat nothing unless I prepare it. You drink only rainwater, and we open that door for no one." Silas looked at her through tired eyes. "You are a strange woman." "I am Clara Ara Sterling," she replied. And I don't let my investments die." The next 2 days were terrible. Silas's body fought the poison violently. He shivered with fever. He shouted at shadows that were not there. Sometimes he begged Clara Ara to run away before he hurt her. But she never left. She held him down when he thrashed. She cooled his forehead with wet cloths. She sang quiet lullabies during the worst hours of the night. Slowly, the poison began to fade. By the morning of the 3rd day, his eyes looked clear again. Silas sat up weakly. "I feel hungry." Clara Ara smiled slightly and handed him a dry biscuit. "Luxury dining, my lord." He took it and studied her face. "You saved my life." "Perhaps," she said calmly. "Why?" Clara Ara shrugged. "Because I despise bullies." Silas lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles softly. Before she could answer, loud pounding shook the study door. The barricade moved slightly. "Lord Sterling!" Mrs. Grolton shouted. "Open this door!" Another voice joined her, smooth and oily. "Cousin," it called. "I have brought a doctor from the asylum." Silas froze. "Archibald." The door shook again. "They are going to declare me insane," he whispered. Clara Ara picked up the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Then we greet them properly." The door burst open. Mrs. Grolton stood there with a thin doctor and a richly dressed man with soft features. "With Lord Archibald Sterling." Behind them stood Lydia. Clara Ara felt her heart drop. Archibald stepped forward. Silas, thank heavens, we feared the worst. Silas stood tall beside Clara. To what do I owe this intrusion? Archibald smiled. Your wife sent a letter claiming you were violent and mad. Clara stepped forward. I sent no such letter. Lydia pretended to look shocked. Oh, Clara, you begged me for help. Silas looked at Clara silently. She met his eyes. You know the truth. For a moment the room held its breath. Then Silas laughed. A real laugh. He pulled Clara close. Perhaps she did trap me, he said calmly. But she is the only honest thing in this house. His voice turned cold. Leave my property, now. Archibald's smile vanished. You are bankrupt, cousin. By Christmas Eve, this house belongs to me. He stormed out. Weeks passed. Silas and Clara sold furniture to survive. They worked together in the abandoned mines beneath the cliffs, searching for copper. The work was exhausting, but it brought them closer together. On Christmas Eve, Archibald returned with the sheriff to claim the estate. But Clara and Silas were waiting. Silas placed a heavy copper ingot on the table. We discovered a hidden vault beneath the mines, he said calmly. 4,000 bars of refined copper. Archibald's face turned pale. The estate was suddenly worth a fortune. The sheriff escorted Archibald away. That night, Clara and Silas sat in the empty ballroom. Moonlight poured through the glass ceiling. Silas looked at her quietly. I have a confession. What is it? I knew it was not Lydia that night. Clara blinked. Well, then why dance with me? Silas brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. Because when I saw you hiding in that cloak, I saw someone as lonely as I was. Clara smiled softly. You did not keep me. What did I do? You caught me. She stood and held out her hand. It is midnight. Silas took her hand. And I believe you owe me a proper waltz. There was no music, only the sound of the wind outside and the beating of their hearts. As they began to turn slowly across the empty ballroom. This time, there was no contract. No trap. Just two people who had survived everything together. And at last, the curse of Ashborne Hall was broken.